Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a book that literally turned the scientific community upside down, Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan and Cacilda Jethá. We're going to look at exactly why these two authors claim that basically everything we think we know about human relationships, marriage, and family might be completely wrong. To kick things off, I want you to think about something deeply personal. Have you ever felt, just exhausted by modern relationship fatigue or dealt with jealousy or infidelity? Well, are those personal failures? Or, and this is the wild idea the authors propose, are they just a massive mismatch with our ancient evolutionary past? It's kind of like we're trying to run a culturally invented software on incredibly ancient biological hardware. All right, let's map out where we're going. We'll start with the standard narrative of evolution, then check out the author's prehistoric counterclaim, dig into the biological evidence, see how agriculture changed the whole shebang, and finally, wrap up with the fierce academic controversy this theory kicked off. Okay, part 1. The standard narrative. The accepted paradigm of human evolution. Before we get into the book's big argument, we really need to understand what it's fighting against, right? So the standard narrative says men and women are basically shopping for entirely different biological needs. The male, he's supposedly hardwired to look for youth, fertility, and future fidelity just to make sure his genes get passed on. The female, meanwhile, is supposedly looking for wealth, status, and a guy who's going to stick around to protect and provide for the kids. And traditionally, we're told, this results in the classic monogamous pair bond, one that's pretty much always wrestling with jealousy and a constant stressful struggle for fidelity. But Ryan and Jethá, they say this traditional view is completely flawed. They argue it suffers from a concept they playfully call Flintstoneization. You know the old cartoon, The Flintstones, right? Where cavemen are living in these suburban houses and using dinosaurs as garbage disposals. Well, the authors argue that evolutionary psychologists are doing the exact same thing. They're just projecting our modern, suburban biases onto ancient hunter-gatherers. Basically, we're looking at the ancient past through the seriously distorted lens of our modern culture. So, let's move to Section 2, the pre-agricultural world. Life before civilization. According to the book, if we want to truly understand human sexuality, we absolutely have to look at how we lived before agriculture came along. Early humans lived in these small, highly mobile, and fiercely egalitarian bands. Because there weren't many people around and survival totally depended on the group, everything was shared freely. And when they say everything, they really mean it. Food, childcare, and yes, sexual partners. In this kind of environment, they argue figuring out exact paternity just wasn't a thing. To back this up, they point straight to our closest primate relatives, the bonobos. In the bonobo world, sex is incredibly frequent, playful, and varied, and it actually acts as a massive social glue. It's not just about making babies. Fascinatingly, they use it to diffuse tension, keep the peace, and build trust. Ryan and Jethá suggest that early human societies probably looked a lot like this. Sex wasn't some scarce resource to fight over, it was a shared experience that actually brought the community closer together. And that brings us to this mind-blowing anthropological concept called partible paternity. So get this, in some of the hunter-forager groups still around today, there's a literal belief that a single child can have multiple biological fathers. Seriously, every man who has sex with a woman while she's pregnant is considered a father to that child, and they all pitch in to raise it. The authors use this to show that, historically speaking, exclusive paternity was absolutely not a universal concern for our ancestors. All right, moving on to Section 3, Evidence of our past, the biological clues. If our ancestors really were having multiple partners, our biology should show it, right? And honestly, this is where the argument gets super interesting. Take testicle size. Human testicles are actually larger than those of highly monogamous gorillas, which heavily hints at a moderately promiscuous past. They also point to hidden female ovulation, which is actually pretty rare in primates, as a built-in strategy to encourage mating with different partners. And it goes even deeper. The actual shape and volume of human ejaculate suggests an evolutionary history of sperm competition. Literally, sperm from different males competing inside the female reproductive tract. They even argue that female vocalizations during intimacy evolved as a signal to attract other partners in a communal setting. On top of that, there's our low sexual dimorphism. That just means the physical size difference between human men and women isn't all that huge. If you look at highly polygynous species like gorillas, where one massive male dominates a whole harem of females, the males have to be gigantic so they can violently fight off competitors. The fact that human men and women are relatively close in size, it suggests our male ancestors didn't have to constantly violently fight each other for exclusive access to mates. Which brings us to Section 4, the invention of monogamy, the catalyst of agriculture. So, this begs a huge question. If we're biologically hardwired for communal living and multiple partners, how on earth did strict, lifelong monogamy become the standard around the whole globe? Well, the authors argue the massive, game-changing turning point was the agricultural revolution, about 10,000 years ago. We shifted from these small, roaming bands into a post-agricultural world of permanent, crowded settlements. And with permanent settlements came a totally new invention, private property. The impact of agriculture literally changes everything. Think about it. Pre-agriculture was all about communal survival, but post-agriculture introduced private land ownership and economic inheritance. Suddenly, once a man could hoard land and wealth to pass down to his heirs, he needed to know without a shadow of a doubt exactly who his biological children were. Paternity certainty became an absolute economic necessity, and to guarantee that, men had to start strictly controlling women's sexual behavior. So ultimately, Ryan and Jethá come to this bold conclusion. The nuclear family and lifelong monogamy, they aren't natural biological imperatives at all. They're basically just cultural adaptations to an agricultural economy. We essentially invented monogamy just to protect our stuff.
Finally, Section 5. Controversy and modern takeaways. The dialectic resolution.
Because this theory totally wrecks traditional evolutionary psychology, it is no surprise whatsoever that it sparked an intense, wildly polarized debate. On one side, the book was a massive runaway hit. It got huge praise from commentators like Dan Savage, who called it the most important book on human sexuality since Alfred Kinsey. And for a lot of readers, it was a huge relief. It stripped away all that deep-seated shame we feel around relationship fatigue or wanting novelty. It framed those feelings not as some terrible moral failing, but just as natural echoes of our deep evolutionary past. But we have to look at the flip side. The academic consensus from anthropologists and biologists has been, well, overwhelmingly critical. Scholars like anthropologist Ryan Ellsworth have flat out accused the authors of cherry-picking their data. Critics argue the book relies on biased reporting, dramatically oversimplifies incredibly complex anthropological records, and just conveniently ignores any evidence that doesn't fit their neat, compelling little story. Critics also hit hard on something called the naturalistic fallacy. They remind us that, hey, just because a behavior like partial paternity pops up in a few isolated tribes, it doesn't definitively prove that all humans are promiscuous by nature. And more importantly, just because something happened in our ancient evolutionary past doesn't automatically mean it's good or right for us today. Assuming that natural always equals morally good is a dangerous logical trap. Ultimately, whether you side with the academic critics or the enthusiastic fans, this book forces a really vital conversation. The thesis might not be completely bulletproof, but wow, is it thought-provoking. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. How would your own expectations of love, jealousy, and marriage shift if you started seeing them not as unavoidable biological destinies, but simply as cultural inventions? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it gave you a clear, balanced look into a truly fascinating debate.